I think the reason why we did do the, we did talk about this Five Skandhas yesterday. I think it really helpful. It's we in the intermediate course we've been talking about the legitimacy of contemplation, right? I mean that contemplation has a role in vipassana. I mean in the Satipatthana Sutra, the Buddha actually describes the four foundations: contemplating the body, contemplating, right? So he even uses that word, contemplating, and so we did one on the three characteristics. But anyway, I think that I'm just repeating myself, but I remember I told everyone that I was at a sit many years ago with Shinzen Yang, and he said that he thought that the Buddha's teaching that was the most brilliant and the original part of the Buddha's teaching, the Five Skandhas. But it is certainly quite amazing to think about the process of disidentifying, right? Of stepping back. And so I was reading this morning, and I think that's what triggered this. By the way, I decided that generosity, self-generosity, definitely fits. I thought about that later, and I thought, here's that. It was sort of like intuitive. We are generous with ourselves. Mm-hmm. We can be. So the last part of this, I forgot my glasses. Usually I can either forget my hearing aid. I can't think of both of them to save my life. So I can hear you now, but I can't see you. Nick says he likes that. He's talking about there's a dog way, and it just doesn't need to make any sense. He speaks about how we vainly confine ourselves within. He said you, he referred to his students as you. He said you vainly confine yourself within matter, sensation, perception, volition, or thinking, and consciousness, the Five Skandhas. So they talk about it, all these teachers, they say we confine ourselves, we're locked in that, we're embedded in these five things, and because they are so, and they actually happen, as I said, like a frame in a movie, and that so that it's like a magic show. So then we're completely, we're identified with that. I am that. I am my body. I am my feeling. I am the perception. We identify with it. And the idea of stepping back from that identification is extraordinary. I mean, it's just, the idea that we could do that and not be, lost in that. It's like, who would you be if you decided you were not your body, your feeling, your perception, your thoughts, or your consciousness? Hello? Who would you be? And that's the big question. That's the $64 question. We say, well, I wouldn't be anybody. Oh, maybe. Maybe. That might be right. So, I wanted to read this. So the poem, he's quoting a poem by an ancient teacher. He was ancient, but the teacher was even more ancient. And I'm going to read this, and this is where he made the reference to confining yourself. I want to read the poem and talk a little bit about, actually I'm going to talk a little bit about mindfulness. We like mindfulness. Brad likes mindfulness, don't you? So this is should I try to pronounce his name?
Yes.
Chong Ching. Chang, C-H-A-N-G, C-H-I-N-G, Chang Ching. It's the best I can come up with. He's old, by the way. Way old. This is like maybe the 600. He says the ultimate truth is wordless. Okay? The ultimate truth is wordless. people of the time do not realize this. What time is he speaking of? When he says people of the time, he could be talking about, 2014, right? He was talking 600, but to people of the time, it doesn't matter when it is. It's always, people of the time do not realize that the ultimate truth is worth. They impose the practice of other things, considering them accomplishments. We could... Vipassana could be the practice of other things. Mindfulness could be the practice of other things. Christianity, Islam, no matter what. We practice and we consider them accomplished. We do not know that inherent nature has never been sense objects. Inherent nature, your nature, has never been sense objects. Your nature is not seeing, feeling, touching, tasting, smelling. It's not body. It's not even mind. He says your inherent nature is not sense objects. Whoa. That it is, and he says your inherent nature is a gate of subtle, wondrous, great liberation. I'm barely able to read this, you all. It's just pitiful. So forgive me. Yeah, have you got some reading glasses? Aware of all there is without being stained or obstructed. This light has never stopped. Did you hear that? John has a. I just love watching John with it. Deep. He's like Rodin's thinker, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Whose are these? We got to get together. Without being, this light has never stopped. From ages past up to the present, it's been steady, never changing. This light has never stopped. It's never changed. What if this light is really what we are? Shining like the sun on near and far. Though it touches myriad colors, it doesn't mix with them. This subtle illumination of the spiritual light does not depend on being cultivated and refined. It's like it doesn't really matter, right, how much we practice. The truth is, that light doesn't need it. It's like something else that needs it, perhaps. But the subtle light does not depend on being cultivated or refined. Since we don't understand that, he says, we grasp forms and things, right? We grasp what we see, what we smell, what we taste. We grasp those things as reality. And just again, we grasp nama, rupa, right? Feeling, we grasp the five skandhas. It's just like rubbing your eyes, falsely making optical illusions. They wear themselves out futilely, passing many eons in vain. If you can turn back and reflect, there is no second person. All your conduct and activities won't be lacking in the real aspect. I just love that. They say this, Doc Way says it over and over. He says, Mary, there is no second person. Nick, there is no second person. There's not you and you. There's just you. There's what is so I'll just, this is a good lead into there's this wonderful guy named Gurdjieff. How many people know Gurdjieff? Oh, that's pretty good. He taught in St. Petersburg during the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and he got out. And it was quite amazing. But he said that there are. He said, there are. We're just a mess of eyes, right? We're not one eye, right? Every eye that pops into our head, we're this, right? And there's different ones, right? There's like a greedy one. He says, like, so say like Ivan might say, well, I'll never lie to you. Of course, but Peter, is a liar. Peter inside just lies all the time. But Ivan would never lie. And so Ivan gets very confused because he said, well, you lied to me, right? Well, Ivan didn't even do it. It was Peter, right? Or somebody else. But that we have all of these contradictions, right? Isn't it true? We have I'm Mr. Generous, and I am very generous. I'm also just as stingy as hell. It's two different people. It's not the same person. So whoever it is who's taken over the steering wheel, that's who's in charge, right? And we utterly believe that person that's who I am, right? Whoever is sitting here right now, Taryn, this is who you are, right? This is who you are right
now.
Who we are. But the truth is, we're this constantly changing bit of ice because there's no one solidified I. So you could say that meditation, that the whole spiritual practice is about finding and coming into touch with, creating, if you want to call it that one essence that never changes. What he calls, right, the spiritual light, this poet. So I love that. So he says, Gurdjieff says, that we're basically machines. Right, because we just switch from one eye to one eye to one eye. So there's no continuity. There's not a one person. So and then all of us probably are more or less. Some of us are less, and some of us are way less, and some of us are more. Meaning that the more there is this cohesive I, if you want to call it self, we're less mechanical and more spontaneous and real. So, so I wanted to talk just a little bit about mindfulness, and then I want to fall asleep. It's really interesting. I forgot. I read the book In Search of the Miraculous probably 25 years ago, and I've forgotten all of it. So I used to give Rajneesh, I used to think that Rajneesh was the person who came up with this idea of mindfulness having an arrow on either end. A point at either end there. And I was quite surprised when I started rereading it. It was old Gurdjieff who came up with that. And, Rajneesh just kind of like borrowed that. Because I happen to know Rajneesh did read Gurdjieff. So Gurdjieff is the person who came up with this probably in the early 20th century. I've said this before to you all, and I think that. Well, I don't want to say that. I'm going to cancel that. I'll go back. So Gurdjieff said, so how do you create this I that is always there? That doesn't lie and tell the truth or greedy but this consistent entity that is always present and is available to relate to somebody else. How do you do that? And he said there's only one way that you do that, and it's an extraordinary and different, by the way. It's like they have these Gurdjieff groups who practice for decades. Still, to this day, they're Gurdjieff groups. He says the only way you can do it is to begin to remember yourself. He calls it self-remembering. And he says, now you tell somebody that they need to remember themselves, and he says they're going to look at you like you're a fool, right? And they're going to, be they might even, what do you mean I have to remember myself? I remember myself all the time. And or somebody else will say, well, that's very narcissistic. You're supposed to go around, either way. But he says the truth is, he says we don't remember ourselves at all because we're lost in those eyes. Remembering yourself would be remembering something that's not those temporary eyes, right? And to say, well, I want to do this, right? Remembering yourself would be begin with just this practice of self-observation. And it's a very extraordinary and difficult process, by the way, and we're not talking about that. But what so interested me when I first read this 20-something years ago was, first of all, this idea of mindfulness as being about remembering yourself, as opposed to the way we tend to practice and think of it as being mindful of things outside. Mindfulness of externals, right? I mean, mindfulness of driving down the road, mindfulness of the traffic. I went to the grocery store and I was very mindful. We use mindfulness and mindfulness of the belly, breathing in and out, right? I mean, so much of the way mindfulness is taught, unfortunately, it's a very external, it's actually about attention to the object. Do you understand? Mindfulness, the way we think of it, is paying attention to the object. Whatever the object is, the breath, the object is the sensations, doesn't matter what it is, mindfulness of the object. That's the way it's taught. And what if that does not bring you really towards the practice that we all need to develop, which would be mindfulness to this, to the self. It's like, you remember the Zen people will talk about, right, if you don't watch the mind, it's like putting a fox in the hen house. Right? You're going, right, your hens wouldn't do very well if you put a fox in there to watch them, would they? So if you're not watching yourself, then that means that there ain't more than likely there is a fox in the hen house. So this is the way that he described it, okay? And I really think it is absolutely 100% correct. And I don't really, it's amazing. I don't think it's taught that much. I mean, not, and I don't do it that much either. But I mean, I think that Gurdjieff was totally spot on. He said that it's like if you were looking at this, if this is looking at this, that's attention to the object, right? It must also be looking at this. If you're lost in this moment, you're not being mindful, right? You're not. I mean, if you're lost in the movie over here, and of course I can imagine why you would be lost, because I mean, God knows I'm attractive, right? Okay, funny, entertaining. Think about it, right? I mean, so you go to a movie, right? And what makes a movie work?
You get out of yourself.
I think mindlessness. You have to lose awareness of yourself.
That's true.
What happens when you go to sleep? Can you go to sleep and be aware of yourself? You can't. It's not possible. So entertainment is, in a sense, in a way, it's a form of sleep, and we endlessly want to be entertained. Endlessly, it's amazing how we're born that way. We entertain me, right? Like the song goes, "Let me entertain you." And God knows, I learned it at an early age. So you understand that there's an incredible resistance to looking at yourself. There really is. It's amazing. What's narcissism? Narcissism is an absolute loss of yourself, and you're looking for yourself outside. Yeah. That's all it is, right? And of course, the more narcissistic you are, the less I'm going to like you, right? Because of course I'm doing the same thing. No, but it is really true that a person who is overtly and blatantly narcissistic, we can hardly bear them, right? Because it's so obvious. It's so obvious, right? They're just interested in themselves, right? That's not looking at yourself. That's I'm trying to see me by looking at Travis. So I'm looking at Travis, and what I'm really thinking is, he really likes me a lot, right? Or he doesn't like me a lot. It doesn't matter. It's still, I'm thinking about me. Janine, she thinks I'm really, did you say wonderful?
Wonderful. Yeah.
See, that's narcissism, right? That's narcissism, because I can't see that. Do you understand? I'm not available to see that because I can only see the way you relate to me. That's narcissism. So, in other words, you don't want to confuse that with mindfulness. Mindfulness is this awareness of self. Nisargadatta said, how do you find something that you've lost? And he said, especially if it's valuable. So you've got a gold bracelet, Beverly, right? And so you walk, you go someplace, and then you look and say, where the hell is my bracelet, right? You don't forget about that, do you? I mean, to some extent, we don't stop until we find it, until we may give up. But if you've lost something valuable, how do you find it? You keep looking for it. You go back and look for it. And my mind obsesses. I mean, hell, I'll obsess over losing a stamp. I'm not kidding. Where are those stamps? Well, they're on my desk right there. I might spend 2 hours looking for them. But that's the nature of, when we lose something, we need to find it. And Nisargadatta says, why is it that we don't do that? We've lost ourselves. But we look everywhere except reflecting back. So I'm telling you this, and I know it for myself. We have a tremendous resistance to looking back at this. And that's why mindfulness is very popular in California, because it's all about looking outside. It's true. I mean, it's all over the place. Spirit rock, it's all over the place. Mindfulness is the cutting edge. Mindfulness is this and mindfulness is that. It's the cutting edge. Because, it's all about paying attention to the outside. Well, we've been told to do that since we were 2. Pay attention, right? But mindfulness, according to Gurdjieff and according to Rajneesh and according to, certainly, I mean, even there's a lineage, there's a Vipassana lineage of teachers who talk about the third foundation of mindfulness, which is mindfulness to mind, right? Well, that would be, what's mindfulness to mind if not looking back? So it's not that it's not in Buddhism, but it is amazing how it isn't stressed, number one. And number two, I'm going to say this one more time. I've already said it 4 times. If you don't realize how resistant you are to paying attention to yourself, you've not put your foot on the path yet. Because to acknowledge how hard it is. I mean, number one, maybe we don't even like ourselves. Really. I mean, there's certainly. I mean, but I mean, to acknowledge the resistance to it. Just check this out for the rest of the day as you're going home. Just remember, just check in and say, oh, when's the last time I was really looking back at this? It's invariable that we will go into the external. Going into a thought, it's not looking at yourself, Monique. Right? That's just one of the skandhas. Right?
You're talking about being more self-reflective, I think.
What?
You're talking about being more self-reflective.
I'm talking about looking back at this. So Dahui says, so one of his students says, I'm really dull. I'm really upset because I mean my faculties are really dull, right? So Dahui said, this is where he would say, you're not the to people. He would say, look back at that which sees dullness. Look back. It's like, in other words, trace it back. Trace it back. Where does the thought come? Go back, trace back to that spiritual light that doesn't have a name. Or if you want to call it, trace it back to just pure awareness. Even. But I mean, not right. I mean, before a thought, what occurs before the thought, right? It's emptiness, right? Say it. Is that confusing?
It's so interesting.
Well, if you acknowledge all, if we just simply say, okay, I begrudgingly accept the fact that something is very resistant to looking back at essence, at silence. I mean, that's why I'm saying even looking at a thought is still looking at it. I mean, it's external to the silence, certainly, isn't it? Looking at if you're looking at a sensation, are you looking at you? No. That's the whole teaching of the Skandhas, right? I mean, unless you say you're your body. Are you your body? If you say I'm my body, then you're looking at yourself when you look at your body. But Buddhism says you're not your body. It says you're not the feeling tone. It says you're not your thoughts, right? It says you're not your perception. It's not even your consciousness. So again, if you take what the Buddha says, I mean that I'm not any of those things, then you have to look back beyond them. That just requires an enormous amount of consistent work. And so I, when I was thinking about the idea of what is perception, we were doing the Skandhas, and so someone serendipitously, I wanted to use that word, I got a link to a YouTube talk, and the guy's name it's called Perception, and the man's name is Rupert Spira, I think. I'll send you the link. Anyone who wants, it's a wonderful talk on perception. And he said this thing that I said it to Jane yesterday morning before we sat, and Jane, she looked at me and she said, that gave me chill bumps. So he said, it turns out, which I did not know this, so rupa is body, right? Rupa means body. So it turns out in Sanskrit, rupa also means beauty. Isn't that interesting? It means the Sanskrit word for rupa is beauty. He said, when the subject and the object collapses, perception sees beauty. That is extraordinary, right? When there's no subject and there's no object, what is left is beauty. And he said, in feeling, when the subject and the object collapse, there's love. As long as there's subject and as long as there's object, there, maybe I can conjure up some love, I can try. But if they collapse, in other words, if they disappear so that there's just feeling, it's love. Love is just there. So, does that make sense? Or if it doesn't. If it doesn't make sense, who cares? In other words, because we have created this false identity of the Five Skandhas, creating a false subject, that means then we're going to create an object. So we experience everything in duality. There's subject and there's object. There's subject and there's object. So this subject likes that object, or this subject dislikes that object, this subject, right? And so the perception, everything that is perceived is through that duality of this and that, okay? So if we say that mindfulness as a process is taking you constantly back, at some point the subject and object collapses, meaning there's just one thing. There's not a sense of separation. There's just one thing. And so Rupert said that when that happens, one sees pure beauty and pure love, which I think is wonderful. I love that. So, I think that's about all I wanted to say. I just want to urge you to consider that mindfulness, when it is only paying attention of the object, that's concentration, but that's not mindfulness. That's because mindfulness is an observation or an awareness of both things simultaneously. Not getting lost in the object, not getting lost in the outside. So that's why Dawei constantly says that you don't have, it's like, so he asked his students, he asked one student, he said, who's 64 years old, he said, where were you 64 years ago? And the guy just looks at him, right? Well, I don't know. And he says, well, so what's going to happen to you when you die? And the guy says, I don't know. And he says, well, then you've got a big problem. Because you have to know. And that you weren't born 64 years ago and you won't die. What is it that was not born and is not subject to death? What is subject? What is not subject? What was not born? What is not subject to death? It's like the mindfulness is the one way that you find that answer. And you ain't going to find it by mindfully paying attention to Monique, right? You're going to find it by mindfully watching, looking back at what they call this subtle spiritual light.